Welcome to episode 606 of the Barcelona Podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and today we are talking all about Barcelona's one big signing so far this season, at least, with Dani Olmo. And to help me talk all things Dani Olmo is Justin from RBL Talk and RB Leipzig Podcast. So just like I did last season with Ilkay Gundogan, and I brought in the experts from the previous teams, I'm doing the same thing again. So Justin, thank you so much for helping. I'd say there's nothing between Barcelona and RB Leipzig, I don't think, at any point. So it's not really enemy lines like I've had with some of the other people. But thanks for coming over, at least over the podcast lines, and helping with Dani Olmo.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk money first. I know it's the most boring part. It's where in the algorithms, everybody drops off, as you know. So, of course, I have the hubris to start with that stuff. So we're going to talk money. 26-year-old Dani Olmo, 10 years after leaving Barcelona for Dinamo Zagreb as a 16-year-old, has returned to his native Catalonia on a 6-year deal for $55 million plus $7 million in add-ons, which is right around what Leipzig wanted with his 60 million euro release clause. So when you heard that number, that it was a 55 million plus 7, did you think that was a fair value for him, or did you feel like RB Leipzig might have got the better end of that deal?
I think it was a fair evaluation for today's market, including the availability of that he's been quite injury prone throughout his career at RB Leipzig. He's only played around about under, say, 40% or something like that of games available. So, but the way I look at it is that he's one of those players where off his own foot can do something magical. He's called El Mago for a reason. And, I think 55 million is a quite respectable price for someone of his caliber, even at the time of not being able to play so much football.
Yeah, we're going to get to the injuries. We're going to get to production later on. But I first want to start with even location, because yesterday I was trying to fill out, and this is less than 24 hours ago, I recorded this depth chart and tried to figure out where Dani Olmo fits in there. Very versatile player, of course. And we've seen him now over the years play all over what we'll call a front four in a 4-2-3-1, mainly, though, as an attacking midfielder. So mainly as the one in that 4-2-3-1, but more than 80 appearances on the wings, and also the occasional appearance as a center forward or in the midfield. And he even said in the few comments he gave to the media during his initial presentation that he's comfortable playing on the wings, that left wing, right wing, doesn't matter, wherever the manager needs me. But, it's really rare that he's in the center forward or midfield spot, but it's an attacking midfielder. Do you see him fitting in at Barcelona in a specific position, or do you think there might be concerns about him as an inverted left winger? Or is there a position where you'd say if Dani Olmo plays here, he'll succeed for Barcelona, and if he's mainly playing in another position, he may not succeed?
I think he's adaptable enough that he'll be able to succeed in any position that you give him, obviously, as long as you don't put him at centre-back or something like that. But if you put him at, an attacking midfielder, even as a number 10, as they say, or either side, the left or right, I believe that he'll be able to adapt for Barcelona, especially being at home. Like he's going to be feeling a lot more happier with himself, and hopefully his football will come along with that. And I think he'll do absolutely fine.
Well, talking about his position is one thing, but when talking then about the injuries, so let's get into some of the negative stuff here. His medical did take a little longer than normal medicals do take after his knee and shoulder had to be looked at. Injuries are definitely the main concern I've heard from Culés and those who might only know him in passing glances. He missed 27 matches last season. Would you say, so this is a multi-part question, but is his injury history a concern to you? And B, though, is he even an injury-prone player? Because, again, for Barcelona, Pedri and Ronald Araujo are injury-prone players. You know they're going to miss muscle injuries, or Ousmane Dembélé was for a long time, and now he grew out of it with PSG incredibly. But, there are injury-ridden players who are injury-prone. You know they're going to miss time. And then there's players like, Gavi had the ACL injury, or, Koundé's had one injury or two injuries in the whole career. And, players just deal with one thing and then they recover. So would you say he's an injury-prone player, or is he somebody that, you're not too concerned with his future once everything is kind of wrapped up?
Yeah, so going into that, part A, I don't think that the injuries are too much of a worry. I mean, it's something to look at and think, okay, we're taking a risk here, obviously from both sides, from our perspective when we had him and also when you brought him just recently. And then I don't think he's injury prone just yet, but that could change. So I think he's just been really unlucky with how he's been managed as well, been put on the pitch. And for instance, Marco Rosa played Xavier Schlager last season, and he was like not very well, and he now been torn a ACL, so and he's out. He missed the complete Euros. So player management hasn't always been the best thing over at RB Leipzig sometimes. So I think if he starts to get injuries and very small ones quite constantly, then yes, we can say he's an injury prone player. But as of this time, it's very hard to say. I think he's just been very unlucky with the amount of injuries he's had.
Yeah, so I guess to follow up to be clear about that, has for his injuries, have they been small little one-offs as you mentioned, or has he had some of reoccurring things pop up?
I think mainly the knee was probably the most common thing, but it was never the same knee as far as I'm aware of. So he's
Hmm.
had like an injury and then it's like, oh, he's got another knee injury, or it's the same thing. Like we came back, and when he did his shoulder just recently as the most recent injury, I believe, we all thought that, this is like really bad because we thought it was like the same knee or ankle or what his previous injury was. And thankfully it wasn't that, because I know he fell pretty hard. And yeah, everyone at RB Leipzig was thinking, well, what's happening? So
Well, let's talk about him more as a player. So we're assuming, the money we're done with, the injuries, he's on the field. So he was the top scorer at the Euros, albeit that was with 3 goals in 6 matches. So not really a huge number, but enough to win the Golden Boot. And when I say 6 matches, Spain obviously played 7, but he never got off the bench against Italy. And what kind of goals should Barca fans expect out of him? He did score 8 last year, 5 the year before, 4 the year before that, and 7 the year before that in his first year with RB Leipzig. And then his assists have always been somewhere between 5 and 12 about every season. So as much as Kool-Aids might argue about Rafinha and get frustrated with Rafinha's production, Dani Olmo has never even hit 20 total goal contributions, meaning goals and assists, in a season. So if I would say, just like with Rafinha, if we're to expect that player, players can change in what they do, but as far as goal contributions, you don't really see huge jumps from year to year when players are already in their mid-20s. So if he's not really contributing many counting stats, but we know he's a really important player, I'm being facetious here, but what does Dani Olmo do?
So Dani Olmo is one of those people that, by the sounds of it, it doesn't seem like he does a lot on the stat sheet. Although, from my memory, he's always produced when he's been on the pitch. So he's going to be able to give you goals. He's going to be able to give you assists. He's going to be also take the attention from defenders and also other midfielders in the opposition. So you're going to be able to free up space in areas, and he's able to work in small type corners, positions, whatever you would like to rephrase that. And he's able to still make that final pass. So even if he doesn't make the actual assist, he could also pass it to the person that may just do the assist as well. So is I expect his numbers to go straight up, to be honest, at Barcelona, because I see Barcelona as a bigger and better club with better. And this isn't me just trying to, brown nose you or anything like that. It's
Yeah, of course.
actually, I find Barcelona one of the best clubs in world football with the best, well, not the best, but better attackers and better players at their disposal than at RB Leipzig.
Well, in terms of Dani Olmo and how he could feature for Barcelona and the styles, right? Because I think the club, obviously, and the propaganda of him returning home, and he was raised in La Masia and all that stuff. But as far as the way that RB Leipzig, and I have to be honest, I only saw RB Leipzig maybe 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 times last season. So as far as how heavy the press is, or can you just explain what system RB Leipzig runs, that and where he fit in that, again, in terms of even the defensive pressures and things like that and verticality, as opposed to fitting into what Barcelona might want to do under Flick, which I think we're still kind of figuring out what that looks like as well, because it is also a change of formation from Xavi's 4-3-3 to a 4-2-3-1.
I think if Hansi Flick does the same thing as what he did at Bayern Munich, we do very similar pressing style. It's Gergen pressing, I believe, is how to pronounce it correctly. And so every single player has to press the ball and retain ball possession as soon as the ball is being lost possession of. So Dani Olmo is a hard worker. He will be able to get the ball back, and he'll also be able to, flick passes, do things with the ball that other players cannot do. So I do believe that if Flick is bringing in the form that we saw him win multiple trophies with at Bayern Munich, then he should be able to fitting in that quite comfortably because he's used to working hard all over the pitch. He's not just going to stand there and do nothing and just stay up the front and only just try to be on the offside or offside trap or what you would like to call it there, like right on the line there. He doesn't play on the shoulder there. He plays all over that front, including tracking back into his defense as well. So I think he should be okay.
Well, if Hansi Flick does what we've seen in the preseason, defend in a 4-4-2, so again, it's attacking 4-2-3-1, and then largely defending in a medium block 4-4-2. If Hansi Flick is going to go with that and Dani Olmo's position, because again of Ilkay Gundogan and Pedri likely in the middle, we even saw at the Euros, which we'll get to in a minute, but at the Euros it was Dani Olmo coming in for Pedri when he went down and playing as that number 10, so it was like for like in that way. But it is possible that Dani Olmo is third on that number 10, where his best natural attacking position is. He's third on the depth chart there, so he might have to play quite a bit of inverted winger, because as things stand, and I know RB Leipzig today signed the young, the Belgian Antonio Nusa, right? I believe that deal was done.
I believe he's from the Belgian league, but I think he's actually Norwegian.
Oh, right. Yes,
yeah,
Norwegian winger from the Belgian league. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did do a little YouTube short on him because he was linked with Barcelona for a hot minute there as a potential candidate back for Nico Williams. That deal doesn't work out and all that stuff. But so that player, that being Nusa, will come in for a wing spot. But if Dani Olmo is needed to defend and asked to defend as that inverted left winger in a 4-4-2, we saw him again defending and playing mainly as that attacking midfielder up high in that press. So do you trust him to have to go all the way back to his own, basically all the way back to his own goal if there's an overlap on the wings? Are you going to trust him in those kind of positions to defend like that? Is that the kind of, when we say hard worker, is that the kind of hard worker we're talking about? Are we talking about, trying to push forward as the tip of that press, where you'd expect one in a 4-4-2, you'd expect one of your front two to cut off those angles?
Well, it's going to be interesting considering he hasn't had to do much at RB Leipzig. However, he shouldn't be too unaccustomed to it for the simple fact that he's playing as a central attacking midfielder and then he plays wide as well anyway. So we don't play traditional wingers, so to speak. Like, we don't play your left winger, we don't play your right winger. So he's more central and then he drifts wide. So instead of just starting more central, he should just be playing more wide, and then it should just be natural back to that. So I don't see him doing anything too bad in a sense of costing goals or being lazy or anything like that in defense out wide. It's going to be a little bit of an adjustment, considering he's played like 95% of his career in a more central role. However, he may just be starting out wide and then drifting central, so down at Barcelona.
Well, how much faith would you have in him to, again, I think the idea of the propaganda of he's La Masia is that it's quick, one touch, really good technical ability. And of course he does have that. But would you say that he is somebody that is a very high level, top level technical player in world football? Or is he kind of that second tier where the example would be, again, Frankie de Jong, where Frankie de Jong takes that extra moment on the ball, and it's one of the great frustrations that Kool-Aid's have with him. But so is Dani Olmo, would you say that he is a stereotypically dogmatic, Barcelona player when it comes to the technical abilities and the speed of passing and decision making?
Yes, I would. You should be perfectly fine. Should be able to do your one-touch passes. He sees the game mentally before most players do, so that's also what makes him such a unique and great player. So I believe that you shouldn't be taking any extra touches or anything like that. I think the main thing at Barcelona will be just adjusting to a new position. Like you said, if he's going to be down the pecking order and not being able to play in his preferred position for the most time, if he really wants those minutes, where at RB Leipzig, he's almost guaranteed them, considering of the quality of he is compared to the rest of the squad, where at Barcelona, he's going to be needing to fight for those minutes in front of other people if he wants that preferred position. So he's going to probably be left out wide to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it says more about Gundogan having to be where he's going to set up under Hansi Flick more than it is about, I think, Dani Olmo not fitting or having to be somewhere else. It is kind of Dani Olmo can play the left wing and can play in the middle, but Gundogan has to play in the middle. And I would rather have him there than as one of the pivots. We saw under Xavi last year. It didn't really work great. So we've been pretty positive about Dani Olmo so far. So let's be a little negative just for a second, because aside from the injuries, obviously Kool-Aid's, much like any fans of any one of the major clubs, and I think most fans are like this in general, but they get frustrated, and especially the number signings that are 55 million, and we'll say the not even worst case scenario, because it didn't wind up that badly, but in hindsight, the Cesc Fabregas signing, the return home, right, the prodigal son returns, and doesn't really always work out the best that it could. And so Dani Olmo could, very realistically follow that kind of same path. So I guess best case and worst case scenarios, right? The best case, we know what that looks like, right? Where Barcelona's winning trophies, he's a major player, he's a starter, and it becomes Dani Olmo really ascends to being a star in world football. But worst case scenario, injuries aside, he's on the pitch. What about Dani's Olmo's game will get him booed or get him or will frustrate Kool-Aid to the point where it may not look like the 55 million plus 7 is a worthy price tag for a player like him?
For him specifically, maybe making mistakes, and by mistakes I mean, like the wrong pass at the wrong time or anything like that. I feel that you might be getting some of these at the very start of his career at Barcelona, because obviously you've got a new system, you're going to have new players. Like at Leipzig, he was there for several years, I think about 4 years or so. So you've we had the same players around him most of the time. They knew what he was going to do or how he was going to do it. We see this currently with Xavi Simons. So he'll do things, and then even though he's coming back on loan for us, he's not really adapted to the other players that they're in the squad. So he'd do a pass, and then you'd think like, what's up with that? Where was that to or something? But in his mind, that was the right pass to play. So that's probably the most thing you'd be thinking of that. And then really maybe your goal and assist output, because you may be expecting him to reach that 20 milestone in a season. So if he's playing, 30 matches a season at least in, say, the league, is he going to achieve that? Because he should be more than capable of achieving that with the talents that he has.
Yeah, that's interesting. Every year for the preseason, I always say, all right, this number of total goals usually wins a Liga. This number of goals conceded usually wins a Liga. And then I try to go through the players and say, well, that player contributes this number and that player contributes that number. And there's always some variation when Barcelona wins or loses the league. And I haven't done it yet, but I would say that I think Barcelona are going to need somewhere between 8 to 12 goals from him this season to push for the league, taking into account the very expected drop, not necessarily in total goal contribution in the season, but from Lewandowski. I think goals per match or goals per 90 is going to be dropping a little bit in that case. So every time I seem to see Dani Olmo, when I watch him, it seems to be in big moments, in big matches. And thinking about his career from a non-Barcelona perspective, because so many times before when he was leaving Dinamo Zagreb the first time, or not the first time, but he never went back. But 2018, 2019, I actually went back in my own notes. I just like Dani Olmo, what kind of notes have I had from him? 2018 and 2019, actually, we did almost a whole show in 2019 because it seemed like he was going to be coming for 25 million from Zagreb. Instead, of course, he goes to RB Leipzig at that point in January of 2020. And then in 2021, he gets, that's where the connections to Barcelona started again. It's gone quiet for a few seasons, always a little bit of pop up and down. But again, every time that happens, I feel like, okay, I got to tune into Dani Olmo, see what's happening in case he arrives. And, I think the biggest moment would be that hat-trick against Bayern Munich last August in the DFL Super Cup. So I think when thinking about his big moments, would you consider him a big game player? Because I think that's been an issue with Barcelona in the Champions League, those demons of the Champions League, that when the lights get brightest, this Barcelona team have not been good since, basically since they last won the Champions League in 2015. It's just they've had big issues in big moments. So would you consider him a big game player?
Absolutely. He's one of those players that even if he doesn't seem to be doing anything for 75 minutes and the game's 1-1, he's the one that you want to be having the ball, especially if you're wanting to win. If this is a cup final or anything like that, something big, or a El Clasico or anything like that, he's going to be able to pop up and he's going to do something special. He's a natural born winner. I believe that he wanted to stay at RB Leipzig because before we were getting trophies just a couple of seasons ago, we were just one of those clubs that were always going to be getting top four, always getting Champions League football, but never really winning anything, so to speak. And he did say that he was, looking for a potential exit possibly to a team that is going to win trophies. So he wasn't unhappy, so to speak, at Leipzig. He was just obviously wanting to win trophies like all players, and he really evolved a lot over the last about 3 seasons when we started winning the DFB Pokal back to back, getting deep into the Champions League, and then winning our first DFL Super Cup. And it was all him, basically. Like, we have obviously 10 other players on the pitch that played their roles, but no one really stepped in and came to the fore when the going was tough to win the game.
So from an RB Leipzig standpoint, are you concerned about replacing him or what your season is going to look like losing him? Like, I mean, I think I don't want to understate. Was you're kind of saying it? He was that important for RB Leipzig that you feel like the team might struggle a little bit without him.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of players that are coming in. Like the 19-year-old Norwegian is wearing number 7. He's supposed to be Dani Olmo's replacement. To me, that's not possible to replace someone of Dani Olmo's caliber. And if you're bringing in someone who, to me, is unproven in a top European league, is he going to make that transition? And we've also don't have any bigger signings to fill the boots. Sure, we have Xavi Simons back for an extra season, but he actually gives us more problems than what's we've got, so to speak, because I've always said that he's too critical of a role of our team, just like Dani Olmo was, and then we're going to not have him the season after because he's a loaned player. So I'm all for having him back at the club. He's a fantastic footballer. I'd take Dani Olmo back in a heartbeat as well. But when you've got these big players that are sitting there at your team and then they're gone, that is so hard to replace. And we just don't have the funds to go out and spend 80 million on someone to be able to get a good enough player to fit that void. And we also don't have the younger talent coming through the ranks through the youth squad. So it's going to be very interesting to see how our season pans out and how these new players do fill in that void that will be Dani Olmo.
Well, since I do have you here and we are talking about Xavi Simons, just briefly, Barcelona went hard for him for that loan, but I think it was just the sheer loan amount would have affected whether they could register him FFP as well as his wage and the issues about trying to fit that into the salary structure and having to pay that. So I think Xavi Simons wound up being just a bit too expensive for a loan this season with Barca, but I do expect him next season for them to go, that being Barcelona, hard to bring him home as well. And is he a player, we'll say just as this year, let's say he repeats kind of what he did for RB Leipzig last season, he does the same thing this year. What kind of number and what kind of fit would Xavi Simons be at Barcelona? I mean, what would be the fair value plus the expectations of what kind of player he could be?
Fair value, that's one of those really hard questions, because considering he's only 21 now, so we'll go 22 when he's being sold. You don't think he's hit the ceiling, so to speak, so there's obviously still potential there. And then you're obviously looking at he wants to have a decent salary. I'm not too sure what his salary is at PSG. I do know that we're covering the full amount at RB Leipzig. So I mean, 100 million gets thrown around a bit, but depending on if you're getting add-ons or anything like that, anywhere between, if we're talking current value, about 80 million plus is fine. But obviously PSG will probably be looking at getting a little bit of extra money as well, and for lost wages and things like that. So with PSV Eindhoven not needing to have any money in the transaction, that may come down a little bit, but it also may not. So I'm expecting his stock to actually rise at RB Leipzig this season, and it's going to be tough to see where he goes next season.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's one where Barcelona will easily know. I mean, at this point, this is just based on the numbers that they're reporting, that he's at 1.5 million euros, which is just impossibly low. There's no way that he's actually at that number. He's definitely at something more than that. Because for 30,000 per week, it's probably triple that. There's no way that number's that low. So I would assume that he's going to be making somewhere between 7 and 9. That's just about where I think he would be on a reasonable wage. Remember, Barcelona's wages are also generally a little bit inflated for Ansu Fati when they did his renewal. Lewandowski and De Jong are a whole different story. All right, let's finish up on Dani Olmo, and then we can get you out of here, Justin. So this is a little fun one. Is Dani Olmo's Leipzig highlight the handball free kick against Bayern Munich? Because obviously on the interwebs and on Instagram and X and Twitter and whatever, that's the thing that seems to always continue to break through, because it also happened against Bayern Munich and it was like a special little moment. But was that the highlight? Is that something that you'll always cherish, that memory?
I'll always cherish it because it's against Bayern Munich, but I wouldn't say it's a highlight of his career and time at RB Leipzig. But I do like to give a little bit of stick to my friends who are Bayern Munich supporters about that. So I wouldn't say it's his highlight as per se itself at RB Leipzig.
And just to remind people what happened, he dribbled over to the right wing, a little bit of time wasting, and instead of having it dribble out of bounds, he just stopped it basically right on the line. And Bayern Munich was like, oh, why'd he leave the ball? And then he ran away from it as if it was going to be a throw in for Bayern Munich, but instead it was still in bounds. So it was then picked up by a Bayern player, and a free kick then ensued. So yeah, a little bit of fun stuff there. Whether that's sportsmanship or the dark arts, who knows? But good to see that he has a little dark arts in his boots too. So we did talk at length about his time at RB Leipzig, but he was also at the Euros, as I mentioned, playing with Spain over the summer, taking on a much bigger role after Pedri went down. I mean, what's new, Pedri going down? But of what you saw for him with the Euros in Spain, do you think there is that much of a difference between the player that I think Kool-Aid did intently watch with Spain from the one that you saw for Leipzig over the seasons?
A little bit, yes. So at RB Leipzig, I wouldn't say over the seasons, but this season in Bundesliga football, just last season coming, not the upcoming one. If you watch the back end of our season, Dani Olmo was missing a little bit due to injury, and he was actually coming back from some injuries. So I wouldn't say that his performance was actually peaking from coming back from his injury. Back at the Euros, he would have been completely like peaking from having back to fitness, back to form, and just playing great football. So that there is pinnacle Dani Olmo. That's exactly what you're trying to get. And at RB Leipzig, we were having that only once after his injuries, like a couple of games after coming back from injuries, we were starting to get that. So the trick is to make sure that he's playing, getting his match fitness, playing, and on the pitch doing all that for Barcelona.
Well, Justin, this was great. Not sure about the Venn diagram yet, at least between Barcelona fans and RB Leipzig fans, with the exception of, I guess, if people really like red, that might be the helpful thing. But yeah, I mean, please take a moment here to plug your podcast and what you have going on with the RBL Talk.
Yep, so you can find RBL Talk on all podcast apps and directories. All you need to do is search RBL Talk or RB Leipzig Podcast. We do live streams during certain match days. So I'll be doing one coming up for the DFB Pokal season opener on round 1 against Rot-Weiss Essen. And I also do some Bundesliga and Champions League watch-alongs throughout the season. And it's normally a weekly podcast, sometimes every 2 weeks, depending on how often our fixture is, and also with the guests coming through.
Well, Justin, this was great. As I said, I'm glad you said watch along too, because now I get to plug in my outro. Remember, the watch along for me is Valencia. That's down in the show notes description below, as well as everything you need to know about RBL Talk. That's also down in the description below. So follow along with Justin and the crew. But yes, the watch along this Saturday, 3:30 p.m. That's East Coast time against Valencia, and that's on Tifo. So down in the description below, it's Ola Kool-Aid as the promo code. Remember, if you're a Patreon, and I know you're Patreon, let me know of that. And if you have a microphone and a camera, I trust you as a Patreon that I can have you on as a guest throughout the watch along, and we're going to have a little fun in the post games as well. So if you need to find any of the links for where I am or find through that, again, it's down in the show notes description below. And as far as the rest of the community, you need to find those links. It's Discord or the closed Facebook group, the Barcelona Podcast. You answer the questions, I let you in. Then you can also follow along with everything on Twitter or X and Instagram. And then, of course, a good rating on the podcast apps and subscribing to the YouTube channel are a huge help. We're on our way. We're almost at 20,000. Man, even if I don't get a follower again, hitting 20,000 on YouTube, wouldn't that be exciting? So hopefully we could do that maybe before 2024 is up. Who knows? But most importantly, though, again, thank you to Justin and RBL Talk, the RB Leipzig podcast. And thank you for listening to the Barcelona podcast. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Forza Barca.